Hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of our CML lab, connecting it to the internet. The second part here, we're going to configure NAT so that the subnet from our LAN is translated to this network, which is provided automatically to the router, which will connect us to the internet. So if we now go to the router, here's the console of the router. We need few things. One is the pool, the NAT pool. We're not using a NAT pool, we're actually using NAT overload. So we're hiding behind that interface, and that interface got an IP 192.168.255.81, and it has a default root. Everything is configured DNS. So whatever comes from the LAN network 10.1.1, I need it to be NATed under that interface. So that way they will have my broadband connectivity off to the internet. These devices have the DNS, DHCP IP, and all the settings, the default router from the pool which we configured on the router. So let's finish the NAT then. NAT has two types. One is to create, actually three types. We have to configure an access list. So the access list is just to tag what subnet you want to NAT. We create the access list first. Second thing, we create the NAT configuration. So here we have source NAT. We're coming from internal network going to the internet. Source NAT. So when we are configuring that part, we have to point to the access list we created, which identifies what subnet to NAT. The third thing is to create IPNAT inside, IPNAT outside to the interfaces that will do the translation to outside and from inside. So let's start with the access list. So conft, and let's call IP access list, and here I will use extended, and I will call it NAT out. And when I do that, I will say permit IP, the subnet coming from 10.1.1.0, and then the wildcard mask is /24, so it's going to be this much. If they're going to, from this subnet, where do they want to go? Anywhere. So I would say any. Okay, any, and then I would say okay. You have the implicit deny, so to avoid that issue of dropping stuff you're not meant to, let's say permit IP any. So this access list which we created, and we called it NAT out. NAT out, the spelling, sorry, the if it's capital letters, you need to be careful. It has to be exactly as that when you're using and representing it. So that subnet 10.1 will be identified by the NAT, by the access list when we configure the NAT. So that's the first part is complete. Second thing is to create source NAT. So IP NAT, and so we create inside, that's source NAT, and then where do you want to, what is the source NAT? Is it a static subnet you want to configure? Is it from pool? What is it? So let's do the question mark. We creating a list. So list, we already have one that's called NAT out. That's the one we are using. When we NAT, what are we going to do? Are we hiding from a pool? We creating a public IP address from a pool, or we're hiding behind an interface? We said we're using the interface, and that interface is Ethernet 0/0. That's the one that's facing the internet. Before I do that, I do overload. Okay. And we said the second part is to configure the NAT and use the access list that we created. When we do that, we do overload. That means any subnet we have in our LAN that goes under this interface, they will hide behind interface IP address of Ethernet 0/0. So we did the second part. And if I just show you, do show run, and if you see that LAN pool we created, it has the DNS, it has the default root, and it has a subnet we reserved in the first IP address. Then if you see the interface that's connected to the LAN, we gave this IP. The one that's facing the internet, we get in through DHCP. But the pool, the IP NAT inside list, it's using NAT out. That NAT out is this access list. It's identifying that subnet to be NATed, and it's hiding behind the external interface, which is Ethernet 0/0. Third part is to go those two interfaces, Ethernet 0/0, and say NAT outside, and this one NAT inside. So let's go to interface, Ethernet interface Ethernet 0/0, and we call IP NAT outside, and exit this interface, do an interface 0/1, and we call IP NAT inside. So now the three things for the NAT is complete. One, to create the access list that identifies the subnet. Second thing is to configure the NAT itself and use the access list that we created. And the third part is to configure the interfaces as the inside NAT and outside NAT. So that's all good. Now let's save and go back to these devices and desktop. If we now ping 8.8.8.8, that's the router, sorry, the DNS and IP of Google. So if we ping that, we're coming from our, let's trace what we're doing. We're coming from this subnet 10.1.1. whatever that IP is, one IP from that subnet. The router receives it. The access list now identifies this subnet needs to be NATed, and if you're coming from this interface, say IP NAT inside, and then the router says, do we have a NAT configuration here? It checks, it has a source NAT and getting inside NAT here, outside NAT there, and it says we're using an access list, it's been identified correctly, so let's NAT it. It will NAT under what? From a pool or from IP? It will do the interface overload. So we have that subnet and it will hide behind that. That subnet will change when it reaches the router to this subnet, and then it will have a port translation. The port translation, when the traffic comes back, that port will know what source it came from. So let's check the desktop machine and say 8.8.8.8, and sure enough, we can have connectivity to the internet. We have a DNS, isn't it? So let's check google.com, and that one also is reaching. For Ubuntu, let's do the same, and let's say ping google.com, and that's also connecting to the internet. So this is a simple way, a quick one, just to show you how you can create your CML lab internally, and if you need something from the internet, downloading updates or maybe anything like that, you can configure that basic DHCP pool, the NAT, and then the root. You're getting a default root from the external connection. So thank you again for your time, and see you in another video.